Hey guys, it's Oージマン, and welcome to what I'm anticipating to be probably the biggest episode of this masterclass series. And today, what we're going to be covering is output. Pretty much what I want to do in this video is just go through every single topic I can think of in regards to like speaking output and like texting and all that. And kind of discuss each little topic and go into some details and hopefully give you everything you need to know about output to the point where you probably won't even have any questions to ask. Well, who knows? You probably will. People will find something that they don't understand. Anyway, let's get straight into it. So the first thing I want to touch on are the stages of the output ability. So at the start, you're going to pretty much be like, really, really struggling to put together a sentence, only being able to talk to one person at a time. Like no matter how good your input is and how much you understand, at the start you're going to be, struggling to talk with just one person, putting sentences together, kind of fumbling around in your speech. Eventually you'll move on to being able to, talk really well with that one person. And then after that, you'll be able to talk in group to 3, 4, 5, whatever. But your ability to speak will not only get better in terms of your actual, sentences you put together and all of that. You'll also get better at speaking in groups, knowing when you're going to be able, when it's your turn to speak, knowing when to listen to other people, knowing how to react to how people talk and all those different things of outputting. One thing I think a lot of people forget about with output is that it's not just how well you sound when you say sentences and how your accent is in that. It's how Japanese you are in the way in which, you listen to other people's speaking. You listen to how other people speak, you react to that, you talk in groups, and you react in ways that sound Japanese. That's one of the biggest, parts of output people don't think of, and that's one of the biggest things that will slowly improve as you go through and get better at output. Now, one of the biggest questions I get asked is, when should I start outputting? And I feel like it's very different depending on the person, but a lot of people wait way too long. Like they'll wait 1 year, 2 years, 3, 4 years or whatever, which is just mental. That's not something you should do. And so in my opinion, the best time to start outputting is as soon as you feel like you can at all. Like as soon as you feel like you can make some sort of conversation, just do it. Just try and go in and make friends, just start outputting. So I recommend, if we go back to this thing here, see how it's kind of in the middle there. What that means is like, start outputting, 4 to 6 months in, if you can. 6 months is probably a good time to start outputting and actively trying to use the language and talk with people. Now we'll move on to how to start outputting. Now, to a lot of people, this is going to seem like a really simple thing. And I agree, it should be a simple thing, but some people overthink it and, have problems talking to people and all that. The best way to start outputting is, make friends, of course. Go make friends with Japanese people and all that. But what you want to do is try and make friends that are, in the beginning when you're starting to output, that are going to be talking to you about simple topics. For me, when I started outputting, I was talking to a lot of joshikosei, so like high school girls and all that stuff, high school students. So they're not talking about politics or, all these different like complicated topics, science and all that. They're talking to me about, real dumb shit like, oh, do you have anyone you like? Or, some stupid shit like that, like real basic topics where you don't have to think much and you can just talk like put together basic sentences and just have a chat about just random things like, cultural differences or something stupid like that. And that's a good way to start outputting, is outputting with people who aren't going to make you talk about some complicated topics. And when you start getting into output, there's a few different ways you can make Japanese friends and all that. I'd go on and look at, Hello Talk, Tandem, like look for those language exchange apps and go on there and make friends. Now on the topic of how to actually get better in output this is kind of a complicated thing, because a lot of people say, just input more and you get better at output. And while that is the case, that's not the only thing you need to be doing. You need to be actively outputting constantly, It's not good enough to just be sitting there and inputting all day and then magically expecting that one day you're going to be able to speak perfectly. It's just not realistic. To get better, you need to be actively trying to, improve, talking to all different people and using Japanese as a tool to communicate with people. While I say trying to get better, one common mistake people have is where they look at language purely as a skill to get better at. But what you really need to be looking at it as, if you want to get better, is you need to be looking at it as a tool of which that you use to communicate with other people and make friends and stuff. And that's when you're going to really start to improve in the language. When you're actually using the language to communicate with people and not just try and, just get better and try and sound perfect, but using it as something to communicate your thoughts with people and just try and make friends and stuff. And that's where you're going to really see your gains in output. Not when you're treating it as a skill and looking for language exchange partners or anything, when you're actually using it, as a communication tool to talk to friends, make friends and all things like that, and do things in the language that you would want to do in English other way. Now that's all the real basic stuff, the initial kind of stages of output and just real basic knowledge of it. Now to get into sort of some more finer details, I want to talk about the topic of perfectionism. There's all this talk now with all these like bullshit courses and that coming out talking about infection in the Japanese learning community or whatever. I'll tell you what the real infection is, and that is perfectionism in the language. People being scared to output and scared to be bad. I'll tell you something. When you start, outputting, I don't care how much you're bloody immersed, how many bloody anime series or YouTubers you've watched, how much Hikaru videos you've watched, you're going to sound shit, When you start outputting initially, you're going to sound absolutely terrible and there's absolutely nothing you can do about the beginning. It's just like, I don't know what people expect. You're going to immerse perfectly, you're going to immerse constantly, and then all of a sudden, you start talking and you'll sound like a native speaker. Like, are you delusional to think that that's actually possible? I think this probably comes from the whole notion of early output is really bad for you and all of that. But to me, it's just dumb, that whole thing of early output. Of early output being a bad thing. I'll tell you what you need to do is when you start speaking, you need to be comfortable with being shit. You got to be comfortable with not sounding perfect, not sounding how you exactly want to sound, because you'll slowly get better, slowly improve your ability to speak. And then eventually you'll get to a level where people will be like, wow, he's an amazing speaker, and you'll feel comfortable in yourself and in your levels of Japanese speaking ability. But in the initial stages, you really need to become comfortable with being bad and getting rid of this whole idea of being a perfectionist and trying to perfect your speech. Because let's just have a look at it, the people in the community who really care about sounding perfect. I'll tell you something, those people who really care about sounding perfect and don't want to show any of their bad parts of their Japanese ability to the world, they don't even look perfect in the end anyway, because they're so scared to output. All of a sudden, it sounds like they're reading from a bloody script all the time whenever they output, so it just sounds weird. So you need to be comfortable with not being perfect to eventually get close to perfection and get closer and closer to it by practicing and outputting more. Now that brings me on to the next topic, which is early output versus late output. Which is worse and what is the effects of both? Let's start with, the classic thing of early output. That's the one thing so many people have said, don't early output, you ruin your accent or whatever. Okay, if it ruins your accent, why do I sound like I do when I speak Japanese? I started outputting maybe 2 months in, something ridiculous like that. As soon as I knew some words, I was trying to use it to communicate with people and just shoving stuff together and speaking like an idiot all the time. Half the time I was like typing something in Japanese, I put it into Google Translate into English just to see if it made sense. Dumb stuff like that. I was doing that right from the start, speaking, doing all this random stuff. And if any of you watched, Saido's video on nitpicking my Japanese, you'll see my Japanese pronunciation is the least of my worries when I'm speaking Japanese. So like, where's this early output? Where's the damage been done to my Japanese? Yeah, like I don't see any damage. Do you? Now, in contrast, let's look at some other people. I'm not going to name names because that's just fucking mean, to actually name people out. But people who've been learning for multiple years, and there's many of them, trust me, there's many of them. I'm not talking about one person or two people. Many people who've just read, they've just listened, they've just inputted for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however many years. Then you see them output, and it's like, wow, I thought, early output's meant to be bad, so these guys should be perfect. Why are they so shit? And the real reason is because they've never practiced, they've never actually gone out and spoken and got better at speaking the language. It should be common sense, but for whatever reason in the immersion learning community, it's not. And where I think a lot of this problem comes from is because these people, it's not their fault. A lot of these people had it instilled in their heads from a long time ago that if they immerse enough, one day they're just going to wake up and be able to speak perfectly. And if they can't speak perfectly, and when they go to speak, they don't feel comfortable speaking, they should just immerse more and one day they'll be perfect. Now, clearly that's not the case. For anyone who, is coming into this with a fresh mind, not pre-indoctrinated into some sort of way of thought, you have to see, why would you not speak to get better at a language? But that's just a thing that kind of occurs in this community. But yeah, what I'm saying is early output, don't worry, just output from the start. It's not gonna mess you up, trust me. But yeah, like I was saying, comparing it to late output, what's the effects of that? Let's have a look around at the rest of this community and what level people are at, the people who have never outputted until like 3 years into it. How do they sound? Compare them to me or to some other people who've early outputted and tell me, how do they sound compared to me? Or what about Ananya? Didn't she start speaking like straight away, like how I did? Compare me and her Japanese to some other people in the immersion learning community and tell me which one you think you would rather sound like. I think the answer is, pretty obvious. So all I'm trying to say here is not, oh, look at me, I'm a sick cunt. I'm trying to say, Don't worry about early output. You should be more worried about outputting too late and putting it off for too long. From the start, use the language for what it's meant to be, a tool to communicate with people. Go make friends and start talking with people, Now, the next thing I want to talk about, this is one thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about, having a language parent. I don't know where that idea comes from, but, they'll say, have a language parent, Pick one person and try and copy exactly the way they speak when you output. Yeah, like if you want to perfect how you sound and like really, sound absolutely amazing and sound like one person in particular, yeah, that'll work well. That will really work well if you pick one person in particular kind of copy. You might, it might be really good. But I'll tell you something else. It's also completely unnecessary. If you're listening to all different people speak and you have a really, really good conceptual understanding of the language, you're not going to be mixing shit up that much anyway. Maybe you'll have like what I have and you'll mix some intonation up and some pitch accent up, but that's a different story, That's something that's completely different. Every single person learning it is mixing up a standard Japanese pitch with shit foreigner pitch anyway, so I don't see what the problem is there really. But in terms of trying to sound like one person, you're going to sound fine if you have a good conceptual knowledge of what the language should sound like, and you can just put together sentences and put together shit yourself. It's still going to sound fine. You don't need to pick a language parent. This being said, yeah, you should still pick some things to be constant in your speech. Like, you still should be trying to sound like someone your age. You should be trying to sound like someone from the area that you're interested in sounding like. Try and keep yourself consistent in the way you speak, but you don't necessarily need to just pick one person, a language parent, pick one person and try and copy their speech exactly. Now, this kind of brings me on to the next topic, which is dialects in Japanese. Now, the thing with dialects is I feel like there's so much misconceptions about this that it's insane. For one, I feel like people don't even really understand what standard Japanese, Hyozungo actually fucking is. Pure Hyozungo, like pure standard Japanese, is spoken in just Tokyo, yeah? Like, I'll put up a thing here, like I put up in my other videos, but see all those little different colors, those different pitch patterns and all that stuff, So if you want to learn, if you're going to be one of those idiots that are like, I just want to listen to people from speaking standard Japanese because I want to speak standard Japanese, like, what are you thinking? Like, seriously, you're just going to listen to people from one town until you sound like that? It's ridiculous. Then you're going to hear someone from a different area, like Kansai or something, and you're going to have no idea what they're saying. Just because you listen to like a little bit of someone else or a little bit of someone from a different area doesn't mean you're going to speak like that. I listen to people from Fukuoka, there's a YouTuber called Represent Fox, and those guys, yeah, they're all from Fukuoka. Tell me when I speak if I have any, Fukuoka dialect in my speech, because I don't. Because I can tell what that sounds like and I purposely don't use it. So in your output with dialects, yeah, you should try and speak like one area, speak like one particular, pick a dialect and speak that dialect. But don't be so scared of listening to others' dialects because it's not going to impact your speech that much. Even if it does at the beginning, you're going to sound like a shit foreigner either way in the beginning. So you don't need to be too worried about mixing dialects a little bit anyway. You got more important stuff to worry about in the beginning. Like for me, right at the start, I got told, oh, you're a bit all over the place with your dialect. Like you got a bit, a bit everywhere. But that wasn't because I was, listening to all different places. That was just because I was messing stuff up. Nowadays, yeah, I have a bit of standard Japanese pitch and Kansai pitch mixed in, but mainly Kansai. But the thing is with that, is that like, that's pretty normal. There's plenty of people like that in Japan. It just sounds like, I was born in Osaka, grew up there, and now I live in Tokyo. That's a bit what it sounds like, It's completely normal. No one's going to listen to it and be like, no one sounds like that. It's not like that. You'll be fine. Don't be so worried about listening to random dialects and thinking it's going to affect your output, because it's really not. You'll be able to sit down and, consciously pick which dialect you're speaking when you speak. You don't need to be worried that much. Now let's talk a little bit about shadowing and, chorusing and things like that. I think this, in my opinion, falls a lot into the whole idea of trying to perfect Japanese. If that's what you really want to do, like if you're doing this as a hobby and then this is your life, you love Japanese, you just want to get as good as possible for a hobby, go for it if you're interested in that. But I think it's really unnecessary. I've reached my level of Japanese with doing zero shadowing, zero chorusing. And I feel like probably in my Japanese ability, the biggest point which I can, say is my best point is my speech, is my accent and all that, and I've never done shadowing and all that. So I don't think it's necessary to do it. You can do it if you want to, take your Japanese that little bit step further in the end, but you shouldn't be doing that, in my opinion, until you're like a really advanced learner, someone like around my level, and then taking it to that next stage. Until then, in my opinion, it's not super necessary, and I feel like you're going to get more from just immersing and trying to improve your accent and your speaking that way. So you can do like this chorusing and shadowing if you want to do it, but it's not completely necessary. And in my opinion, if you don't enjoy it and you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's not necessary. If you love doing it and you feel like you're getting great results, I mean, do it, go for it. But I feel like it falls quite a lot into that whole idea of perfectionism in the way in which you don't necessarily need to do it to sound great. Plus, again, with the whole thing of perfectionism, is like, what are you trying to do this for? Like, what are you trying to get perfect at Japanese for? Like, if you're just like me, you're not working in Japan, not living in Japan, just doing this to get really good, and I want to do it for, competing in Japan in MMA and all that. If that's the case, what the fuck am I going to get out of it if I improve my Japanese by another 1%? It's not going to make a difference to me or anyone else around me. All it's going to be is a bit of a show off to other people learning Japanese. So why would I do that? This whole thing with perfectionism is just unnecessary in my opinion, and it's a bad mindset to instill in people in the community, I think. Next topic, really big topic. Don't overthink things, yeah? Like, when you're like doing stuff, this is like the same kind of thing I was talking about the dialects. Don't overthink everything, Like, when you're outputting, don't think, oh, should I output like this? Should I output like this? Should I like write a notebook? Should I fucking like make this many language friends or something like that? Like, brother, a language is just a tool to communicate. Use it as that. Don't think too much. Go make some fucking friends and go talk with them. That's all you need to do. Just, someone said it in my Discord the other day, and I completely agree. Just open your mouth and say words and speak. There you go. That's outputting for you. Don't overthink it too much. Yeah, there's ways you can optimize it and some things you should be aware of, but don't overthink it to the point where you're planning out your output more than you're actually doing it. Again, like I said before, this is not only just, it's not just a skill, it's a tool to communicate. So you need to treat it as such and communicate in the language. Another thing I want to talk about, which kind of links with that, is that so many people ask me, how should I make language exchange partners, or how do I do a language exchange? It's like, mate, what is your problem wanting to do language exchanges, all this bullshit? Go out and make some fucking friends, yeah? Like, go meet some people, make some friends. Then you're not doing a language exchange. You're just talking to people in the language like you would normally, Go make a few Japanese friends. Go hang out with them, go out for lunch, do something. All of a sudden, you're not thinking about how am I getting better at Japanese? What do I do to get better? You're sitting there and trying to have a conversation and trying to have some sort of a connection with a person, and you're just by coincidence essentially using that language. You get what I mean? Like, you're using this as a tool to communicate. You're not treating it as a skill to get better at by communicating with people, making language exchange partners. What you need is friends, not language exchange partners. You need to be going around and using this with your friends and trying to get, make conversation, not try and get better all the time. And this really links into the topic of, you need to be having fun when you're outputting. Remember, the thing is, I've talked about this in some other videos, but the thing is with language learning, is that there's no end goal. There's no time you'll ever be like, I'm done with Japanese. We're all finished here. I've perfected it. We're done. You can always get better. Even in your native language, you can always be getting better in certain areas. So the important thing isn't to be, so focused on the end goal of being fluent or like, getting really good or whatever. You need to be enjoying the process. So even if you suck at speaking and suck at listening, enjoy it by making friends and just using the language to communicate. Don't treat it as a skill to master. Don't get your ego caught up in this. At the end of the day, what you're doing this for is to communicate with people better if you're outputting, And if you don't care about communicating with people, why do you even care about the level of your output? Does it even matter? Then I get some questions of like, should I be practicing outputting with non-natives? Why the fuck would you do that? Like, ask yourself, why would you even do that? What are you doing? You're going to be talking with people who aren't native speakers in the language to, get better at your Japanese. This is the exact opposite of what I've been saying this whole video, yeah? You want to be using this as a tool to communicate. So if you're talking with other English speakers in Japanese, just talk in English, you idiot. Like, you don't need to be talking in a foreign language with other people for whom it is a foreign language. That's just ridiculous. Use it as a tool to communicate with people and, make friends and all that. And plus, if you're doing it with like non-native speakers, you're essentially just going to be trading bad habits with each other. That's one of the good things about outputting with native speakers is you say something, you can see their reaction to it to see if it was kind of natural. You can also hear what they say and use phrases they use in your output as well. And it's almost like you're gaining information. You're also putting out information, probing them with your speech and seeing how they react, looking at their responses and using that to gauge your level of output, and also taking, good phrases and stuff off of them. All of that good stuff, just goes the fuck away when you're talking with random English speakers in Japanese. So yeah, don't do that. I just think that's Ridiculous. Okay, another thing, going back a little bit, kind of to that topic of like trying to sound like you're from an area or trying to sound like something. One thing you should be aware of when you're outputting is try and sound like your own age and gender. There is a way that males speak, there's a way that females speak that's slightly different in Japanese. And it's the same with many languages. There's going to be a difference there. So you want to be trying to actually sound like how you want to sound. If you're a male, that was probably a male, female, probably female. Try and sound like that, and also try and sound like someone your age. You don't want to be a 20-year-old guy talking like a 65-year-old woman. Like, can you imagine how fucking weird that'd be? You want to be, if you're a 20-year-old guy, you want to be talking like a 20-year-old guy. You know what I mean? So you should be aware of that when you're outputting, to trying to be sound like someone your age and your same kind of demographic, if you get what I mean. And if you don't know what that's meant to sound like, I'll tell you how you can figure it out. One big thing you can do with immersion learning is you can supplement your kind of deficiencies in your output with the immersion. So what I mean by this, is say you don't know what a 20-year-old male sounds like, and you're a 20-year-old male and you want to speak like that. In your input, in your immersion, go listen to a bunch of 20-year-old males speak, and then when you go to output, you can copy that. Yeah, you don't need to be picking one specific person. Just listen to a group of people, all different people, and use that to kind of get a general understanding of what you should be sounding like. Another example of this supplementation is one thing I noticed a little bit, quite recently, is that I noticed that I am not very good at giving directions in Japanese or saying where stuff is, be like, go down this street here for a few blocks, take a left, then go right, go there then for a couple blocks, and then on your left there'll be this good restaurant. I went there the other day. Saying like some directions like that, I've realized I'm not very good at it in Japanese. Nowhere near my level of it in English. So I thought, okay, well, how can I improve this? I mean, it's not such an easy fix as it would be, like, say, trying to, speak like a 20-year-old man. But, I can watch videos. I might watch a tour guide video or something like that, where I can improve my output by directly supplementing it with the input. So if you feel like you're lacking in one area, you can improve it through that. This is also kind of on the topic of, like, supplementing your output with immersion. And what it is like, say you're talking to someone, and there's something you want to say. And you absolutely, this is in the early stages where you can't really speak very well, you kind of suck, and you're just trying to get everything out, and it's a bit difficult. Say you're speaking to someone, there's something you want to say, and you just don't know how to say it. You might, put something out and be like, you'll know though that it'll be like, I could have said that better, but I don't know how exactly I should have said that. And that'll stick in your head, you'll be like, how should I have said that? And then next time you start immersing, eventually, at some point, you'll probably hear shit and be like, wow, I could use that in my immersion. I could have said it that way. I could have used this to say what I wanted to say, referring to the things that you hear in your immersion. So all of a sudden, you're supplementing your output by hearing things that you could use and directly using it next time you output. This is why it's very important to also be practicing output while you're immersing, because it's not just the process of first you immerse, then you output. It's a concurrent thing, You're outputting and you're immersing, so they supplement each other and you get better and better over time through doing that. And this directly links into the next thing I want to talk about, which is bringing, say, passive vocabulary into your active vocabulary. So for those of you who don't know what that means, your passive vocabulary is what you understand, and your active vocabulary is what you can actually use in your speech. Now, I got a few questions of how can I transition, words I passively know into something I can actively use. And I think the biggest thing is that process that I just talked about. Because you're going to be understanding all this, but you won't know how to actively put it out in your speech. And so the way you're going to transition those words from passive to active is through practicing speaking and sucking and being terrible. So then when you go back and immerse, you start to pick up phrases and pick up all different things, and you'll be like, next time I speak, I'll use that. And next time you do speak, you will use that. And then it'll kind of stick and be a part of your active vocabulary. And through this process occurring hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of times, you're slowly building up your active vocabulary and slowly building up the range of expressions and the range of words that you can use in your output. And, I feel like just immersing without speaking won't give you this same effect. I think you need to be concurrently outputting while immersing, not at the same time, obviously, but you know what I mean? Like, you need to be kind of doing them both actively and to be able to have this effect. If you're just immersing, I don't think your immersion is going to supplement your output as well, because your brain and you yourself aren't going to feel the real need to absorb it and be able to use it, and you won't be directly using it, so it won't solidify it. But when there's something that you wanted to say, you couldn't say it, and then you hear it in something, your brain is going to latch onto that instantly, and you're going to latch onto that, and you'll be able to use it next time you feel like you need to in your output. So I feel like this is the biggest process that really takes your passive vocabulary to your active vocabulary. Now I'll talk a little bit about, Keigo, like the polite Japanese, when to use it, how to know when to use it, and all of that. Now, a lot of this you're going to be understanding from your immersion. You'll be looking, especially if you're doing YouTube, this is one of the reasons why I say YouTube is so good, is you'll be watching people of all different demographics interacting with each other and seeing in what situations people are using Keigo and like how they're using it, how they're using polite Japanese. Not just when they're using it, but in what form they're using it. So you might see someone who's like, a YouTuber that's been doing YouTube for 10 years and then a new YouTuber, and there'll be different ages, and you see how they interact, and you'll be like, oh, okay, these guys talk politely to the guy that's higher up, and this is how they talk politely, and that you'll be able to see how people talk to other different people depending on their, position in the social, kind of status relative to each other, and seeing when they use Keigo and stuff like that. That's the main way you're going to be able to see it, and you're going to be able to learn when to use it and all that, and in what form to use it. Another way is by practicing speaking, not using Keigo, and noticing that the person you're talking to isn't very happy about it, and they're a little bit annoyed at you for doing it that way. And you can also ask people, oh, should I use it in this situation? When should I use polite Japanese? When shouldn't I? Things like that. It's a work in progress. It's not something that's going to be super easy to understand and something you can just instantly pick up. You're going to be getting better and better at this. And obviously, if you're not living in Japan, like how I'm not living in Japan, it's going to be a lot more difficult, because the amount of Japanese people you meet of like different demographics is, not many. Like most people I talk to are like around the same age as me, university students and all that. So it's very rare I need to really think about how I'm going to talk with my boss at work. You see what I mean? So the best way is going to be watching people do it, in YouTube and natural sources like that, like podcasts and stuff. Not taking in too much from, movies and that, just looking at the real world things and actually seeing people in your real life use it as well. And also you yourself trying to use it and getting feedback from other people. Because this is the thing with like Keigo and polite Japanese, is that it's a kind of like, it's not exactly like grammar or pronunciation or anything like that where there's a clear right or wrong. This is a situational thing, and it's going to depend on the individual person's kind of feeling of it. Like I've got friends in Japan who are like Yankee and, like Motoyan and stuff like that. A bit, Deros, they don't give a fuck. They won't use Keigo to anyone. They couldn't care less. Like to teachers, whatever, they don't care. So if you ask them, when should I use it? They'll tell you, don't use it. I don't use it. But if you ask someone who's very, very polite person, they might say, use it in all these different circumstances. So it's a bit of a difficult thing to know when to use it, but it really depends on your situation, the people around you, and who you're interacting with, in my opinion. And you can learn a lot of that by, like I said, watching YouTube and watching people interact, and also directly asking people and directly, trying to use it and figuring it out through trial and error like that. In my opinion, those are the two best ways to kind of figure out how to use Keigo, what, form to use it in, and then when to use it. Okay, the next topic I want to touch on is outputting via text. So, texting friends or anything like that. And I think, some people might find that easier or more difficult than speaking. For me, I've always found it a little bit more difficult than just speaking because, I don't know, I think I was just more used to speaking rather than texting with people. But I think one of the best ways you can really get good at outputting through text is by immersing in text, if it makes any sense. It's like, say you're texting people, right? You will be immersing in the way in which you're getting text messages from people and reading it. But the closest thing to text is Twitter. So I think if you go onto Twitter, read Twitter and read people how they like doing, talking to each other on Twitter and stuff. I think that's the best way to kind of immerse and build up, your foundational knowledge of how to kind of text people and all things like that. If you do that and, you learn to speak in that, because texting obviously imitates speech, it becomes a lot easier in that. So if you're just reading Twitter and texting and, doing all the other stuff, you should be right in that regards. But that's all I really want to talk about in this video. I feel like there's a lot more topics I could kind of go over for output. So if you have any questions in particular, please leave it in the comments, and I might make a part 2 to this because I feel like outputting is such a big kind of thing in Japanese and there's a lot to it. So yeah, leave, any questions in the comments and I'll make a part 2 at some point. But thanks for watching till the end of this video. Also, if you haven't joined the Discord already, and I say this every time, but the Language Games Discord, my Discord server, is really, really great. There's so many good people in there, all immersing and getting better at Japanese. And there's a much bigger focus rather than drama and all that bullshit, more focus on just getting better and improving in the language. So please join that if you're interested. Otherwise, I'll be putting out another part of the Oziman Masterclass series in a few days, so stay tuned for that. Thanks, guys.